Mark and Sarah's Stampin' Retreat. Today I'm going to be showing you 3 cards that will help you use up your white scraps with your embossing powders. So for this first card, I'm going to use this gorgeous green trio of embossing powders, and this is called the Dappled Pearl Effects trio. And what I've done is I've cut a whole selection of leaves using these paper rose dies. They're called Little Foliage 1, Little Foliage 2, and I've just cut them from scraps of white cardstock. So what I'm going to do is grab my embossing pad, and I'm just going to press this into the embossing pad. You can see this is actually a piece that I'd even stamped on the back of, and I've just cut it out so that I can use the front. And then I'm going to cover them with the green embossing powder. So this one that I'm using now is called Newport. So now that I've done that, I've got this gorgeous effect, but it's not the ideal coverage that I would like. So I'm going to do it once more. So I'm going to dip it back in here. And I'm just going to repeat the process of covering them and re-embossing them. And so now you can see that we've got that really lovely pearlescent green effect and a nice coverage as well. So I'm going to do that with the other leaves and the other colours. So I'm just going to cover each of the leaves twice with a different colour of embossing powder. So I've got a green 5x5 inch card blank and then a 4.5 inch square piece of white cardstock that I've used this Dotted Swirls Debossing cover die just to add a bit of texture to. And then we've got all of our heat embossed leaves, and you can see that it not only adds the colour but it adds some texture as well, which is really lovely. So next thing I'm going to do is just heat emboss a sentiment, and I'm just going to go with this small happy birthday, and I'm going to use my opaque bright white Superfine embossing powder. So now I'm going to glue this onto my card blank. So then I'm going to arrange these leaves in a wreath. And then I'm going to just cut some flag ends into the end of the sentiment. I'm going to add some fine strips behind the sentiment. And I'm going to add that across the centre of the wreath. So there's that first card finished. I don't think you'd even know that those were white cardstock scraps that we used for those. So for this next card, I'm going to do a similar thing, but in a slightly different way. So for this one, I'm going to create panels of heat embossed cardstock and then die cut them from that. Number one is a little bit less fiddly than the last technique, and it's quite good for using up kind of bigger scraps of cardstock like this. And it's also good for when you're die cutting a few different bits out of one colour, because you only do the heat embossing once. So I'm going to grab my embossing pad and I'm going to cover this piece of scrap cardstock in the embossing ink. I like to go over it a couple of times just in case I missed a bit. And then I'm going to cover that with this yellow embossing powder. So for this card, we're going to use these Alex Siberia designed trios. So the trio is called Delicate Blooms, and it's got the Tranquil Azure, the Rose Water, and the Sunlit Gleam. So I'll use the Sunlit Gleam on this particular piece. We're going to use all 3 of the colours. You can see this has got quite big chunks of white in it. Now if you just use it like this, like normal embossing powder, you don't get much of the white in it. So I like to then just sprinkle some more back on top. And then the other thing to do when you've got these bigger pieces that don't really cling to the embossing powder is to heat it from underneath, and then they'll stay in place, whereas if you heat it like this, they'll just fly everywhere. So now you can see we've got all those white bits kind of melted into that. So then you could leave it like that, or I'd like to add one more layer of colour onto it. And to be honest with this one, probably technically doesn't need it. You can't really see any of the white of the cardstock through or anything, but I do like the look of having 2 layers on it. And you see how gorgeous that is as a finish. So then there's the panel in this tranquil azure. You can see it's got like nice white flecks in it as well. But this one's much smoother than this yellow one. This one's got the bigger flecks, and so it's kind of a bit more rough texture, and you can see the big white flecks in, whereas this one's very smooth and it's kind of more of a subtle look to it. And then this one is this rose water. So then I'm going to use this die set from Alex Siberia Designs, which is called Garden Tweets die set, to cut some pieces out of my panels. So I've die cut all those pieces from the panels we created. Then I've got a pale yellow card blank that's 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. And then I've got a piece of grey cardstock that's 1/4 of an inch smaller than the card front. And again, I've used this to emboss it. So I'm going to glue that onto my card front. And then I've got all these pieces. I'm going to make up a couple of the flowers because they're all made up of these kind of petals. So then I want to add this all across my card. So then I'm going to heat emboss this Happy Birthday to You sentiment. And I'm going to heat emboss that in silver to match back with the grey. So then I'm going to pop sentiment up on foam pits. And then I'm going to glue on the flowers. And then we've got another pretty card from our white scraps. So then for this final one, this is kind of more a larger scrap because you do need a piece this size. So for me, I tend to get this kind of piece where I've been die cutting and I've just got a piece left. And I'm going to use this Stamp of the Month from the Stamp of the Month Club from Spellbinders. I'm going to stamp that in black. Then I'm going to take the coordinating die and I'm going to cut that out. And for this one, I want to use the Pastel Pearls Trio. And you can see on the top, these are pearlescent powders. One is called Hint of Blue, one's Hint of Green, and one's Hint of Pink. And so they've just got very slight differing tinges to them. So I'm going to use the Hint of Blue for this one. So I'm going to cover the front of this with my embossing ink. And then I can cover it with the embossing powder. And then I can heat that up. And then you can see that that has got that beautiful pearlescent sheen to it. But because it's translucent, you can still see the stamping through. So then I've used one of these Essential Arches dies to cut an arch out of white cardstock. And again, I've used this plate to emboss it. And I hadn't intended to use that plate for all of them. It just adds such a nice texture that I have ended up using it for all of them. And I'm going to use the next size up, so one down from the largest die. And I'm going to just use that with a 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inch card blank. And I'm just going to overlap that cutting edge on the folded side a little, just so that we can create a card blank with that shape. So I'm going to layer this up on here. And then I'm going to put some foam pads on the back of here. So then I'm going to use this Thanks for Your Friendship, and I'm going to stamp that onto another scrap of white cardstock. And then I'm going to use this die that is from these Modern Oval layering dies, and I'm going to cut it like this, and then I'm going to move it along and cut the other end like that, so you get a shorter oval. And then I'm going to add that onto my card. So that's that card finished, and you can see that lovely shine that you get on there, which I think adds a bit of kind of texture to what is a white on white card. So then if we bring in the others, so then they're all 3 of today's cards. I really hope you enjoyed the video and that you'll get out your white scraps and give it a go. I'd love to know which is your favourite card. Please do let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, I'd really appreciate it if you click like below, and you can also press subscribe if you'd like to see future videos. If you press the bell button and select all, then YouTube will also notify you when I've got a new video available. All of the products that I've used for today's cards are listed in the description below, and there's also a link there to my blog where you can find a picture supply list if that helps you find what you're looking for. Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope to see you again soon.